Well, if y'all want to, I just wanted to highlight something real quick. So, we normally do try to lead off with something that maybe we haven't seen in the news, but this is very important. And I want to commend the TBI and the Metro Police Department and a variety of law enforcement officers because they did a sting and caught some horrible, evil human beings that were doing human trafficking right here in our state. And there were several people that were involved in that bust, and it was a big deal, including the DEA. And it highlights what we've been talking about for weeks now, that sure, there are some good folks that come in, but there's an enormous number of illegal immigrants that come across the border that then come here and commit atrocious crimes like human trafficking. And let's be very clear what they were doing in this particular circumstance, and that's taking advantage of children in ways that are evil beyond description. And so Mayor Littleton has filed House Bill 182. Chairman Littleton has been fighting against some of this human trafficking stuff for years. And in talking with law enforcement and looking at our laws in the books, this sounds like a simple thing, but she's passed a bill, or hopes to pass a bill, and I certainly been involved in human trafficking. About half of their victims, they will tattoo in different ways, sometimes with a name or a mark or even a number. I mean, horrible stuff, but they will tattoo their victims. So Mary wants to put a bill forward and has to make sure that those tattoo artists actually know the signs of human trafficking. So I just want to start off today by saying it's something that hasn't been talked about a lot, but it's something that we're working on.
Very good.
Jonathan, you want to start us off?
Sure. There's a bill that Representative Bain has that basically says that if a lawmaker would want to witness or you think that would be helpful for lawmakers to understand sort of the process that happens right now.
I didn't know she was for the death penalty, but I will see what happens in the committee system. I've never thought about it.
Another question on the immigration bill about student immigrants and the ones who are not in the country legally, and whether or not an LEA can withhold education from them. That bill failed 3 years ago when Representative Griffey had it. It kind of failed on close terms. The Education Department came out and basically said it was, so unconstitutional, suspect, and that sort of thing that it wouldn't be worth trying to pursue. Has enough changed since then that makes you guys confident that it'd be worth pursuing now?
Well, absolutely, and that's my bill. I filed that. And a lot has changed in the last 3 years. I mean, obviously, since that bill came forward, we've had completely porous borders for 4 years. We've had virtually no push on the federal level to secure our borders and keep illegal immigrants from just flowing into the state. Every single state has become a border state now. And so, thank God, we now have Donald Trump in the White House, and he's going to secure our borders and deport those that are legally here. But this bill is a little different than what we saw a couple of years ago in this as well. We're completely leaving these up to local school boards and school districts on whether or not they wish to check immigration status, just like they check residency right now. So they check to see if someone is legally within their area for a school board, within that school zone even, to see which school they're going to go to. All we're saying is that if they choose to, they can also check immigration status to make sure that that person is actually legally in the country as well. I do anticipate a court challenge on that, but with a 5-4 decision back in 1982, look, we're decades past that, and with this particular court, I think that they're much more in favor of states' rights, and I think that they realize that the illegal immigration issue is one that has unfortunately defined one presidency and is now going in a very different direction in a different presidency, but it's a massive issue.
Nicole?
With the budget being proposed this week and going through a couple finance committees, something that was brought up was it's not completely squared with what was brought during special session yet. That'll be done in this amendment. Is there any concern about other programs that have been presented and how kind of squaring that official number from special session might affect other proposals?
I would have to get more details on that. Look, the special session was very clear on what it laid out and what it's going to be paid for. We expect the budget language here soon. But look, the education investment by the governor is tremendous for K through 12 education this year, as well as the scholarship for parents to empower parents to make the best decision for their child. So there's a big investment coming in there. It includes pay raises. It includes other things that are in there. I don't know what they mean by not being squared, but we can take a look at it.
I think it was just some of the numbers weren't exact yet when they were drafting the bill, and so it'll have to be changed and some of the numbers moved around. But I just didn't know if that would affect some of the other programs and if there were any concerns over that.
None.
Chris?
I wanted to ask about the proposed TCAT scholarships that the governor mentioned in the State of the State. It looks like the money from that's going to come from Hope Lottery, which now a lot of other programs are starting to kind of dip into as well. Is there any concern that you might overextend that fund and impact some students that want to have those Hope Lottery scholarships?
No, I mean, I don't been part of the system for a long time. I think he's renaming them. I think there's people who have heartburn over the renaming of it more so than the scholarships. Look, I think there's other options too in the future that we could go down to help increase the funding for the Hope Lottery and scholarships and that sort of stuff. But I think we're in a pretty good spot right now. I mean, they've been working well for years, so we'll keep moving.
I do think it's a healthy conversation to have that for 30 years we've told every single child, well, you've got that. It worked out fine for me. I mean, I have a trade, I have a job that I can do, and that's what I do for a living. But for many, many children, they're not told that there's multiple entry points into the upper echelons of higher education, and that could be a TCAT, that could be a community college, that could be a traditional four-year school, but they should all lead toward a really good job and a career so they can provide for their families. And so in looking at this type of scholarship, we are for the first time truly showing all of those pathways to a student that's coming out of high school and saying, look, you graduated from high school, but that's probably not going to be enough to get that job you're really chasing. So we want to make sure during high school they're looking at those options, and then especially four-year school. That's perfectly fine. That involves around a TCAT degree, a certificate, or a community college degree. We want them going that pathway as well. So I actually think it's going to even out just fine.
Well, I mean, look, if you want to go back, I think there needs to be conversations too. I mean, the worst thing is for someone to use the Hope Scholarship and then in 2 years they're out, because there's also debt that they're going to accumulate as well. So to the leader's point, I think there needs to be more open conversations in the school systems and the guidance counselors about really, is that path the best for you? Are you ready for that path? You go to the associate's degree route, you could go to technical school. I think a lot of it could be determined based off having better communication and better alternatives that they're aware of. Last thing you want is for somebody to go to the University of Tennessee and 2.5 years in, they flunked out. The Hope Scholarship was there for 2 years for them, but then they have this debt that they're saddled with. So I think there needs to be better communication as well.
That seems like a hard number to catch because that number is always fluctuating. So is there any evaluation to maybe doing that differently to be able to help with roads and infrastructure and that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, we say that you put in $30 billion this year. Do you have the workforce to do it, right? And so there's a part of it of you're trying to maximize how much can we put in, how much can we do. You put in $30 billion, and like the most we can do is $1 billion. So the $30 billion doesn't do anything in this budget year as far as infrastructure. So it would be better used going somewhere else, and I think that's where the governor's priorities are. Look, there's a lot of work to be done. I think that the nice thing is with the Modernization Act that was passed, they're starting to get into the RFP process, which is very beneficial. We hope to have 3 to 4 companies who've come through the RFP process for the state on that. That does open us up for other things and other investments, and a lot of it, that $1 billion, we're going to talk to Commissioner Ely and see where that's looking. Is that part of the Knoxville corridor over there? Is it some state routes? Where do we want to go to do that? But things are expensive. Look, I was talking to Commissioner Ely the other day. The I-24 South is like a $3 billion project. The Knoxville corridor is like a $1.2 billion project. And so those two projects make up, 20% of that number? So things are expensive today, unfortunately. And so we're going to continue to invest and do what we need to do. But we're looking to improve the roads as quick as we can.
Just one thing on top of that. Look, $1 billion is an enormous amount of money. So we're putting $1 billion extra on top of the $2.7 billion that we do every year on roads that comes from the gas tax. So just like the speaker said, I mean, we're going to make significant improvement in the roads, both in the quality and in making sure new roads are constructed with that $1 billion. That's $1 billion of taxpayer money. It belongs to everybody in this state, and that's a great utilization of it. But it's a huge step forward too.
Stacy.
Consumer Price Index report came out yesterday. Inflation is still rising, particularly when we look at groceries. Grew 0.5% in January, almost 2% since last year. Will your office's leadership push to get the grocery tax bill, one of the others, passed? And is there any concern that there wasn't any language from the governor in his budget to fill any holes that might result?
Look, I'm a co-sponsor of Representative Davis's bill. It's a true grocery tax repeal. I don't know if we can get all of that in 1 year, if we can get a portion of it, if we can get some of it on certain items, reduce the grocery tax by 1.25% over the past, decade. And so we're dedicated to looking into that again. We've done tax holidays before. I mean, we've cut $5.1 billion in taxes over the past decade. So we're definitely dedicated to that project. And I'm a co-sponsor on with Representative Davis. What I disagree with is the socialist approach to this, where you have to cut taxes over here and raise them over here, which is what the Democrats want to do, and that's just robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's a ridiculous assertion.
Look,
There would be a hole in the budget, wouldn't there, if we don't look
That's
at
how a tax cut works. There's a hole in the budget. We get it back into the pockets of Tennesseans.
well, but not necessarily. I mean, look, I mean, that's not accurate. We've reduced taxes in F&E. We reduced the hall income tax. We reduced the inheritance and gift tax, or actually cut all those. We reduced the sales tax on food under Governor Haslam a couple of times. And we keep growing. So the thing of if you cut taxes, you're going to have to replace it. Well, that's not been accurate in our 15 years of history under two governors. That we're continuing to grow revenue when we cut taxes. So I'm not sure that hypothesis is correct. I think that the second thing to look at is to remember we're the least taxed state in America. I mean, we're the least taxed state in America. You're not paying income tax on your wages. You're not paying a statewide property tax. In Pennsylvania, they pay an education tax. You don't have any of those taxes in the state of Tennessee. And so we are the least taxed state in Tennessee. Now, you are taxed on what you spend in the sales tax, and we understand that. But you're only taxed when you spend, not when you earn. And that's the big difference between us and other states. Now, do you want to look at reducing the sales tax on staples of food? Potentially. I mean, if you want to look at milk and eggs and butter and bread, let's have the conversation. But to say that we're going to repeal the whole grocery tax and we want to give someone a tax break for buying a Snickers bar over here or a frozen pizza, yeah, I don't foresee that. But if you want to do it on staples that people should be, that's the staples of what's defined, then we can have that conversation. But you just have to remember, we are the least taxed state. Our people are not taxed through the roof like other states, and we're still growing.
Box 17.
Julian, if a full repeal of the grocery tax is impossible this year or an across-the-board rate cut, would you all be open to another grocery tax holiday?
Look, we've been open to lots of stuff in the past. I mean, again, I co-sponsor the bill because that's the conversation we need to have is, look, I mean, I for one, am in favor of repealing the entire grocery tax. I understand we can't do it in 1 year. I know that would be a lot to take in 1 year, but we can try. And just like the speaker said, I mean, there's lots of great ideas out there on trying to cut it on some of the products that under the Biden administration went through the roof as far as cost. Milk, eggs, bread. I mean, that's a great place to start under the economy that hopefully will continue to improve and inflation will come down. But we can only control what we do at the state level.
Look, I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it. I know that people are looking at the staples. There's people who are looking at the WIC aspect, which is actually broader than what you assume it is. People are looking at fresh produce or vegetables and so forth. So there's a lot of different ways you can take a look at. Sales tax holiday is another one. We'll see what happens as it goes through. But before you do that, you need to know what those numbers are. Then you got to get with the Senate to see how on board they are with whatever direction the House may want to go.
Speaker, you have a constitutional amendment that would rescind the right to bail for certain heinous crimes. Could you speak a little bit to that?
It could rescind. It gives discretion. I think the bail associations are out there saying it's a mandate that they can't give them bail, which is absolutely false. All it does is tell the judges they have the capability to deny bail for these crimes. They don't have to, but they can. And so that's coming up. It made it through subcommittee this week. It'll be in full in 2 weeks. We look forward to getting to the House floor. I think the bail associations who are fighting it tooth and nail, which I understand because it's going to cost them money potentially if a judge doesn't allow them bail. But the Sheriff's Association supports it. The DA supports it. The public supports it. People want to make sure that if you're committing violent crimes, especially if you've done 2, 3, 4, there's an option for you not to get back out. And so my question is, how many times are we okay with someone committing the same crime or doing other crimes and having victims until we say they can't be denied bail? The Constitution says it's only for capital offenses. So is that the barometer of what we want to say why people can't get out of jail? They have to kill somebody before you can deny bail? I think we can do better than that, and I think the judge...
So there's $35 million remaining in that fund right now. Do you all think that it's appropriate to add $10 million more when there's 35 still in the fund?
I actually think there's more like 50 being added this year, but I'll double check those numbers when we get the actual language from the governor's office. But my notes indicated about 50 more this year. But whether it's 10 or it's 50, the hope would be to get significantly more in that fund so that the moment we get clearance from TVA and from the federal government, we can immediately go into the process of getting a modular nuclear plant right here in Tennessee. And on the Clinch River is already the site that's been identified. So we've got to have enough money in there so that we can immediately start on that project as soon as we get clearance. I mean, that's the fund is not where it needs to be yet, but I promise you this, if we can go to modular nuclear plants in this state, we'll have enough affordable power at a very low cost for Tennesseans for generations to come. I
Well,
mean, it is
yeah.
the future.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's the first site. I think what the governor proposed is the first site. I think there's multiple sites that they've been looking at. So I don't know what they spent or not spent looking at multiple sites, but there's a direction to put this one near Oak Ridge, which makes sense. There's also other companies out there who've come here. I think that I may mispronounce it. It's like Kairos is a company in Oak Ridge that's looking at new ways to have energy and what that looks like. Very promising. We need to be in control of our own power and electricity and not be like these other states where you have brownouts and you have to turn them off at certain points in time because there's too much overload. So we need to be in charge of that, and I think the governor, working with TVA, has put us in a good path.
Let me add to this too. I've worked a lot with TVA since the storms, kind of dug into them, met with Laos before he left. The truth is because of these failed policies of Biden, TVA has to buy energy from other states. We can't generate at the TVA the way we used to because we've completely done away with fossil fuels and coal. So we have to purchase energy. My mom's 81 years old, and her energy bill in a small 2-bedroom house was $540 for the month of January. Guys, that's terrible, and it's all across because we're not generating. We have to buy energy, and then the TVA is not generating that energy. They're buying that energy, and they're passing it on to people in fixed incomes. Whether the state spends $10 million, $50 million, or $100 million, we need to push forward to this and become independent of failed policies of whatever president happens to be there. And so I'm 100% in favor of whatever we can do, especially starting the Clinch River since that's in East Tennessee, and hopefully we will see a benefit from that.
Yeah, and look, I was at a conference and I was talking to a gentleman from California, and he wanted to start talking about cost of living, and he wanted to talk about taxes. And I think his eyes were a little bit open. He was we got to the point of talking about electricity, how much his cost, and he has solar panels on his roof and all that sort of stuff in California, as they like to do. And he was still paying over $2,000 a month. Still paying over $2,000 a month. And when I talked about what it's paying that with solar, and they're buying it back, right? So you don't want to have the policies of what California has, obviously, because they just drive up your cost. And so what the governor's trying to do is meet our demand on what California would consider very low cost for electricity, which we would consider high here, right? But if we can continue to do these small cell nuclear plants and other things, we can bring the cost down, we can afford to continue to grow and not be limited by our infrastructure or natural resources.
Well, the number is $50 million to create the small nuclear. The SMR, that's the Small Modular Reactor Grant Fund. That's for the Clinch River. That's $50 million. There's another 10 just for nuclear energy, for a nuclear energy fund that's separate from that, and then $2.6 million, and then a couple of others down through there. So the total is going to get up close to that $100 million number, I hope, very soon.
Julia.
Julia Baker with the Tennessee Journal. Governor Lee proposed in his budget another 100 positions on in Tennessee Highway Patrol. But we learned this week that there are 233 open positions. Do you support adding another 100 positions? And if so, how can we fill all of those?
No, I mean, I do. I mean, look, has anybody driven down the interstate and seen how many troopers on the interstate now? I think people are going slower, right? So that's safer. I think you talk to anybody in Shelby County where there's been additional troopers, they're going to say that presence has felt safer on their highways, and you don't see many drive-by shootings on the interstates or gang-related shootings on the interstate anymore. Look, no, we need to continue to increase that and continue to get there. I think it's had a great effect. But you're limited on the number of people who are coming in. They have to go through a basic training and go through other things. It's not just like you're hired that day. We'll get there. There's a lot of law enforcement. I can tell you, every highway patrol person that we have met, they were here, I think, a week or two ago, talked about how grateful they are for the state and raising their salaries and putting them in position to be successful and putting the highway patrol as the pinnacle of law enforcement in our state. And that's what we're going to continue to do. TBI has also been increased a lot. And so I'll get back to this. The governor has made a commitment to reduce the size of government and reduce the number of employees, which he has done. And he's reduced it by great numbers. Now, TBI has increased by over 230. I think Highway Patrol has been about 300. And we're still 400 or so less jobs than we were when he came into office. It'd probably been more than 1,000 if we wouldn't have hired. But we're downsizing the size of government and putting it where it's needed, which is in public safety.
Sam.
Speaker, back on the constitutional amendment, I think some questions have been raised about whether it's constitutional. For instance, the question doesn't list all of the crimes that judges would not have to set bail for. Do you
Well,
have any concern?
Well, it does. It just references you to the section of code where all those
Yeah.
crimes are.
I know, but when you're in there, when you're in the ballot box, you're not gonna be able to go back and reference the code. I mean.
Oh, so it's unconstitutional because people can't see what the crimes are? Is that what the Bell Association is saying? I don't understand the unconstitutional aspect of that.
Well, I mean, that's what they're saying.
The Bell people?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're going to throw out anything. They're going to say that it's mandatory that the judges do it, which it is not. They're going to look at these other states and say this is what happened, which they mandated. We're not mandating. Look, at the end of the day, the Bell Association, they want people to make bail. They want people to make bail. That's the understanding, right? That's their job.
That's what they do.
Correct. Our job is to keep the public safe. I'd rather be on the side of protecting victims and allowing the judge to make that determination than arbitrarily saying that everybody who commits a crime other than capital offense can get out of jail.
Any concern about jail space and
That we're talking about is very low. Okay, these are the worst of the worst. As the speaker has said, these are the top level felonies that everybody would think of: murder, rape, robbery. And these are felonies where folks would serve 100% of their sentence if they were to be convicted of that crime. When you look at those folks in most counties outside of your major metropolitan areas, they're getting bonds that are commensurate with the seriousness of their offense and with their criminal history. Many of those bonds are very matched with the statute we have now. But every time that happens, there's a lawyer out there somewhere that comes in and argues to the judge, well, hey, look, you can't hold them in with no bond. And so the judges look at it over and over and over again, and that's fine. But the only thing that those judges should be looking at is exactly what the speaker's trying to do with this. How do we keep people safe? Everybody's innocent until proven guilty. But if you've been proven guilty over and over and over again for violent crimes, dadgummit, there's an assumption there that you're still dangerous. And so the judges should have the ability to be able to keep that person in. And we're talking about a few people throughout this entire state, but those few people wreak absolute mayhem on our communities because they get out over and over and over again under the current Constitution. And it does tickle me a little bit to think that somebody would say by changing the Constitution it would be an interesting argument.
But hey, look, there's a false sense. If when you set bail, people assume that you have to pay 10% to get out. Sam, that's not what's happening. That's not happening. They can charge them 1%, 3%, 2%. They can compete with one another. So set the bail at whatever you want. If you're paying 1% to get out, what does that mean to somebody? $1,000, depending on what it could be, or less? So look, next year I might propose a bill that every person who sets bail and gives bail and allows someone to bail out, they need to be transparent on what company did it, what the cost was, and what was the crime of the individual they let back out in the community. How about that? That would bring awareness to the public about these bail companies and the type of outside of what normal people would
do
expect.
the clerk's offices not keep track of that already?
They don't have that information, so the clerk's given what the judge sets as the amount of bail and what the offense is that the person is charged with. But the relationship between the bondsman and the defendant is just that. It's a contractual relationship between those two parties, and that information is not shared with anyone outside of that relationship. And so that's actually hidden from the public right now as to what is paid into.
But if they jump bail, the clerk knows.
Does the public know that, Sam? Does the public know that they jump bail?
It's a public record.
Does the public know? No, the public does not. Do you report it?
Well,
When somebody doesn't
I've written stories about people jumping bail.
How many?
Well, there were several.
Oh, out of thousands?
But Sam, let me say this: when a CAPIS is issued for a person that has failed to show up in court, CAPIS for them to be arrested. Now that can take a long time, and many times you will have bail companies, you will have bondsmen that will come in and will be asked to be relieved off of that bond. And again, there's no real understanding as to how much money has changed hands at that point, or what has been paid for the bond. If you have high-level violent offenders like that, there does need to be transparency on it, and quite frankly, the judge needs to be able to have the discretion to say, look, this person's jumped bail several times before, they hadn't showed up in court, they've got a violent criminal history, they're just going to be held without bail. And like the speaker said, and again, I applaud his efforts in this, it is going to make our state safer. For some of those worst of the worst, they just have to stay there and stay in jail while they are pending trial. And unless you've committed capital murder and accused of that in this state, they can't do that right now. All right, we got one more.
Real quick, the Metro Police Chief recently said his department wants nothing to do with helping deport illegal immigrants working with the feds. He says it's the feds' job, worried that it could destroy the trust that is on the community. Your response to that?
Look, that's up to the chief. I respect him. I mean, serves Nashville, and Nashville is a lot safer than a lot of other cities out there of similar sizes. So that would be between the chief and the federal government. We don't require local law enforcement. We would ask them to cooperate anytime that the federal agents are coming in to arrest a violent criminal or someone who's being deported. But at the same time, that's really up to each individual department to decide what their resources are and how they can best assist. We provide some state funds, though, and did that in the special session to try to help local departments not actually suffer any negative consequences of participating in any kind of federal action.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Enjoy your weekend.
I had one more question. You don't think frozen pizza is a staple?
I don't think anybody would consider that a staple.
What's not a staple?
Frozen pizza's not a staple.
That's not a staple, man. You don't make a pizza from scratch. That's not a staple. No, I'm a happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you. Happy Valentine's Day.
Biscuits and gravy for breakfast.
It's a staple.
Frozen pizza.
You know a shortcut